Hi guys. What we're looking at is property dualism and philosophical zombies. Um, so we've looked at substance dualism, and when we start thinking about neuroscience and fMRI scans, neuroscience and psychology really does seem to have hit substance dualism on the head. It's kind of like, the arguments might seem plausible to begin with, and I've got to confess Descartes' argument about using Leibniz's law to say, like, there's one thing that's different between the two of them, two different substances, seems quite compelling. But the reality is, when we start looking at the neuroscience, it seems to have hit substance dualism on the head. So that's why an awful lot of people now have moved towards physicalism, where the main idea is that it's all to do with the brain. There is no separate substance, and we will be able to, we might not be able to do it now, but we will be able to one day to unlock all of the mysteries of the brain, including experiences. And so it does, but there is a type of dualism which is trying to accommodate scientific evidence, because no matter, the main problem physicalism has is that it doesn't seem to fit in with our experience of life in terms of who we are, identity, and how we perceive the world. But hey, maybe we're being tricked by the brain. Maybe this consciousness is all just an illusion. But until we get to that point, physical dualists believe that they have an argument. Now, property is a quality of the substance, and consciousness is a property of the substance we call the brain. So it's not really complicated. So consciousness is a property, not a substance. And it's important to make the difference here. For Descartes, it was a different substance to the physical brain, not when it comes to property dualism at all. Now, Leibniz, he had an argument against physicalism. I'll just read out his quote. One is obliged to admit that perception and what depends upon it is inexplicably on mechanical principles, that is, by figures and motions. In imagining that there is a machine whose construction would enable it to think, to sense, and to have perception, one could conceive it enlarged while retaining the same proportions, so that one could enter into it, just like into a windmill. Supposing this, one should, when visiting within it, find only parts pushing one another, and never anything by which to explain the perception. Thus it is in the simple substance, and not in the composite or in the machine, that one must look for perception. So Leibniz's argument, he disagrees with physicalism. His main argument is that, all you would do when if you were able to make the brain so people would walk into it, that's all we'd see. You would see the myelin sheaths, somewhere the dendrite, nucleus. I'm talking about that as if I know what I'm talking about. But they are basically, our brains made of trillions of these things interacting with each other. Or you might see those five guys. I don't know if you've seen the film Inside. Oh, is it Inside Out? Oh, I've forgotten now. But those characters, you've got the little lights at the back there. They're meant to be like memories, and you've got the workings of the brain, but they are not necessarily perceptions themselves. It's almost like recordings. So that's an interesting film. So he argues you could know everything about the mechanics of the brain, but this would not give you an explanation of consciousness. Therefore, physicalism is false. So I want to show you this clip, which kind of backs up what Leibniz is saying on this whole idea of philosophical zombies. It's from Good Will Hunting. It's a little talk by the Robin Williams character.
If I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo. You know a lot about him. Life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientation, the whole works, right? I bet you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You never actually stood there and looked up at that beautiful ceiling. Seen that. If I ask you about women, you'll probably give me a syllabus of your personal favorites. You may have even been laid a few times. But you can't tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and feel truly happy. You're a tough kid. I ask you about war, you'd probably throw Shakespeare at me, right? Once more into the breach, dear friends. But you've never been near one. You've never held your best friend's head in your lap and watch him gasp his last breath looking to you for help. I ask you about love, probably quote me a sonnet. But you've never looked at a woman and been totally vulnerable. Known someone that could level you with her eyes. Feeling like God put an angel on earth just for you. Who could rescue you from the depths of hell. And you wouldn't know what it's like to be her angel. To have that love for her be there forever. Through anything. Through cancer. And you would know about sleeping sitting up in a hospital room for 2 months holding her hand. Because the doctors could see in your eyes that the terms visiting hours don't apply to you. You don't know about real loss. Because that only occurs when you love something more than you love yourself. I doubt you've ever dared to love anybody that much.
Wow. I mean, that's a really powerful speech there. I mean, what he is saying is, how do you account for subjective experience? You know, there's a difference between subjective experiences and knowledge, and we'll go into this in a lot more detail when we look at the Mary argument in the next lesson. But it's a very powerful argument. You may know absolutely everything, but unless you actually experience it, then do you truly have knowledge of it? He's talking about qualia, if you remember. And so this leads us on to Chalmers, one of the few philosophers we look at who is still alive. Well, last time I looked. So he's emphasizing the phenomenal character of conscious states. So the phenomenal, it's our subjective experience of our conscious states. For example, we can all have a conscious state while listening to music, but the phenomenal character of that conscious state will be different for each of us. So, for example, one of my favorite pieces of music is Mozart's Requiem, a beautiful, sublime piece of music. And so when I put it on, it's incredibly moving, and I will have a very different, phenomenal character in my mental state than you do, because you listen to it, but oh, that's just old person music, and you go and put whatever you want to listen on that's just too loud and too many drums and whatever. But hey, I'm making a prejudicial statement there. I've just realized it's about conscious state wrong. So we all listen to exactly the same music, but we will all have a different conscious state while listening to that music, because our phenomenal character is different for all of us. Now, so he brings up this whole argument about philosophical zombies. Now, you might be looking like this during lockdown, but it's not what he's talking about. It's not that type of zombie. Okay, he asks us to imagine a human that lacks qualia. So he calls this a philosophical zombie. They're looking at like us, but they lack qualia, so they would look nothing like the picture on the left. It's a little bit of a character in the Robin Williams. The person he's speaking to, that person has all the knowledge about everything, but seems to lack qualia. He doesn't understand what it's like to be in the Sistine Chapel. He doesn't understand what it's like to be truly in love and all those kind of things, even though he might be able to quote what love is, maybe on the biomechanical level or in giving examples of love. But until you actually physically experience it yourself, then you do not have that qualia, then you are lacking it. So they would look like us, they would talk like us, but it would have no subjective awareness. So yeah, you could ask whether it's a philosophical zombie, and it would say no, doesn't have a mental state. Okay, it's like a biological robot. You know, we might be able to get to the point in the future where we have robots which look exactly like human beings, synthetic skin that feel and have the same texture as real skin. It might even be real skin that is grown there, might be organic, and you'll be able to have a conversation with it. It's passed the Turing test, and you'll be able to, you know, have a conversation with this biological robot or organic robot. but it wouldn't have any mental states. So it wouldn't be lying. Just everybody in the world could be a zombie. So it'd be a bit like you've taken the Descartes thing, you know, I think therefore I am, so that you know internally that you exist because you were thinking, you were doubting. If you were doubting, there must be something to doubt, you know, some substance there for you to doubt. So, but you are no way that you could know the internal world of anybody else. No way. So, as far as you're aware, everybody else in the world could be a philosophical zombie. Could be something that has no quality of mental states whatsoever. Now, before you put your head in your hand and go, oh, philosophy, why do philosophy? Of course, the world isn't philosophical, full of philosophical zombies. Why do you talk like this? Is stupid. He's not trying to actually put a case forward to say that this is the way it really is. He is just simply pointing out that it is metaphysically possible to conceive them. And if it's metaphysically possible to conceive them, then there might be some world in which these philosophical zombies could exist, and therefore consciousness is more than just the physical workings of the brain. Otherwise, through fMRI scans, we'll be able to access someone's consciousness. So again, he's gone down this way. If you can metaphysically conceive of it, then it must be possible. Then qualia, these mental states, must be different from the physical brain. Could you be able to do an fMRI scan of a philosophical zombie's brain and it would look exactly the same as yours, but one has qualia and the other one doesn't? So his argument goes like this. Physicalism claims that consciousness is ultimately physical in nature. That is, it follows that any world which is physically identical to this world must contain consciousness. Fair dues. But we can conceive of a world which is physically identical to this one, but in which there is no conscious experience. Yes, we can conceive it. You know, people say they can. Therefore, a zombie world is metaphysically possible. Therefore, physicalism is false. That is basically the main thread of his argument. He's not saying this world is full of philosophical zombies. He's just saying that it is possible. There's no inherent contradiction, as far as he is concerned, in being able to metaphysically conceive of a zombie world. So, just a quick word on property dualism and supervenience. This is where basically how does the consciousness therefore impact on the physical brain? So just like one set of facts A is said to supervene on another set of facts B. So for example, if the mind supervenes on the brain, then there has to be a change within the brain and vice versa. Okay, so it's really just all saying that there is a relationship between the consciousness and the physical brain. So there are three responses. Zombie world is not conceivable. Metaphysical possible tells us nothing about the actual world, and what is conceivable need not be metaphysically possible. So let's look at the first one. So Daniel Dennett, again, another guy that's still alive, argues that there is a contradiction in conceiving zombies, therefore they are not conceivable. So he disagrees with Chalmers on the point that you cannot consider, there's nothing inherently contradictory about a metaphysically conceiving a zombie world. He says there is a contradiction, and this is what he says. It's quite convincing. Supposing that by an act of stipulative imagination you can remove consciousness while leaving all cognitive systems intact. It's like supposing that by an act of stipulative imagination you can remove health while leaving all bodily functions and powers intact. Health isn't that sort of thing, and neither is consciousness. I left the C out of consciousness. I'll read it out again. Supposing that by an act of stipulative imagination you can remove consciousness while leaving all cognitive systems intact, so leaving your brain intact and everything like that. It's like supposing that by an act of stipulative imagination you can remove health while leaving all bodily functions and powers intact. Health isn't that sort of thing, and neither is consciousness, says Dennett. So I think that kind of like speaks for itself, really. It is quite straightforward that actually that consciousness, there's a correlation between consciousness and health. You know, you can't remove health from the physical body and leaving it all intact, and the same with consciousness. So therefore a zombie world is not conceivable. Okay, it just is not conceivable. It makes no sense whatsoever. So let's look at the second one. What is metaphysically possible tells us nothing about the actual world. Now, I wonder what film that came from. Came out clearly in 1985. I was but a young man. So now time travel is conceivable. But when you start to look at the paradoxes involved, then being able to conceive it tells us nothing about the real world. So, for example, you know, we've all seen films of time travel. It's Back to the Future, by the way. So I suppose in theory, you conceive that you could time travel back and you could meet an earlier version of yourself. And for whatever reason, you end up killing the earlier version of yourself. But the problem with that means that because you're dead, you won't be able to be alive to go back in time to kill yourself. If you can't go back in time to kill yourself, then you are still alive, which means you will be able to go back. Can you see where we're going with this? This doesn't really actually tell us anything about the real world, even though it is conceivable. And time travel films love messing about with these paradoxes. You can conceive metaphysically possible a chocolate tree. I'll just let you think about that for a minute and look at a picture of a chocolate tree. We can conceive of chocolate trees. There is nothing contradictory about chocolate trees, but clearly they are not physically possible. You know, they don't do photosynthesis, they'll just melt in the sun, you know. So while we can conceive of something, actually it doesn't tell us anything about the actual world. So simply saying it is metaphysically possible doesn't really tell us anything about the actual world that we live in. So the last one, what is conceivable need not be metaphysically possible. So you might be able to, you know, conceive of water, you know, thinking of going to another planet and sort of thinking of some clear liquid, but it looks like water, tastes like water, moves like water. And go, yeah, I can conceive of water not being H2O. You know, it's all there, you know. But if we take away the H2O, then it clearly isn't water, it is something else. So even though I might be able to conceive it, it's not metaphysically possible. So there are some necessary truths which you cannot discover a priori. Just thinking about it. They are only discoverable a posteriori. So in other words, you know, empirical evidence. Now let's just say about H2O. This is before the time that we knew water was made up of H2O, of hydrogen and oxygen. We could conceive it, but we don't have the full knowledge. Our knowledge of what water is actually lacking. So we are conceiving of something which is actually metaphysical, impossible, because our knowledge of that object or that thing is incomplete. Now, the way to make our knowledge of that thing complete is through empirical evidence, is through a posteriori. Okay, so what we have there then is physical dualism, put forward by Chalmers, who talks about the zombie world and basically philosophical zombies who are absolutely physically identical to us, but they have no quality, they have no mental states, and you'll be able to know the difference. And then you've got the three different responses to the philosophical zombie.